Hey everyone, it's Sick Kong with a sick surprise update this week. We've got an Origins of Light Destiny banner featuring the King of the Red Moon, Young Jessica, and Dieharte. Now this banner is going to be running from December 9th to the 22nd. Now on the original predicted banner schedule, this banner was scheduled to show up around December 30th, so we are getting it a few weeks early, which only partially answers our previous question about that mysterious extra week in the Echo of Light cycle. So we probably will still get the other banners that were scheduled. This one's being bumped ahead, but all that's going to do is create another mystery later on in the year, so we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Anyway, dealing specifically with this one now, I am going to talk a little bit about the new gear banner later in this video as well. There's not as much to say about the gear, but we will cover it in the same video here, so I've put it in the timestamps if you just want to jump to the new equipment, and you'll be able to get some summary coverage of that stuff. First up, we have the King of the Red Moon. The new Rainforce has ended up becoming something of a hit for AoE rush teams. He deals increased AoE damage, extra fixed damage to his AoE targets, and heals himself a certain amount per enemy hit with AoE. His 3-cost skill teleports him in, then casts an AoE, steals buffs from the victims, debuffs them, and halves their healing. It also has a passive effect that basically cloaks him for a turn after he gets attacked, reducing incoming AoE damage, stripping 3 of his debuffs, and making it so he can't be targeted. Finally, he has a 1-cost revive skill that he can actually recharge over time. After he deals damage to enemies 5 times, his revive will be ready to use again. So his MO in practice is basically to charge in, splash the enemy, usually get killed in return, but then revive and be untargetable for a while, so he is a nuisance. He's a member of Origins of Light, buffed by Dieharte, Jugler, and Freya, Mythical Realm, buffed by Gizzeroth and the Sage of the Trees, and Dark Reincarnation, buffed by Bozel and Licorice. For bonds, he doesn't currently unlock anyone else's bonds, and he needs Brenda for his defensive bond and Shalinka for his attack bond. For content, in PvE, he's on faction for Leviar and Valkyrie in the Eternal Temple, and Jormungandr and Fenrir in Ancient Beckoning. I don't think he'll end up being a meta pick for either of those. The closest thing he'd be able to pull off is basically to cover Bozel's Fenrir job with Black Hole, DK, and Starfall, and that would only be if you don't have any of the true high-scoring units. For PvP, he didn't make a big splash in China, as I mentioned in my last video on him, but the global meta was way more willing to embrace him, with a lot of people adding him to their AoE rush teams in Season 8. He's fast and he has a blast, so if you give him some follow-up support, he can be overwhelming, or contribute to an overwhelming attack. For availability, he's not on the upcoming banner schedule again, and neither is his attack bond unlocker Shalinka, so don't expect to see either of them headlining a banner until May at the earliest. Next up, we have Young Jessica. Young Jessica is a magical DPS with a transformation skill that reduces her mobility, but boosts her skill's range by 3. This synergizes nicely with her talent, which increases damage depending on how far away you are from your target. Her unique headwear gives her a conditional act again on a cooldown that lets her cycle her cooldowns more effectively in conjunction with her transformation. She's a member of Origins of Light, buffed by Dieharte, Jugler, and Freya, Mythical Realm, buffed by Gizzeroth and the Sage of the Trees, and Legion of Glory, buffed by Ledin, Elwyn, and Grenier. For bonds, she unlocks the attack bonds for Emilia, Nomi, and Light of Genesis, and for her own bonds, she's just going to need Liana for her attack bond. For content, in PvE, she's on faction for Valkyrie and Scylla in the Eternal Temple, and she's quite useful against the latter, because she can stay out of the danger zone and lob spells. She's also on faction against Jormungandr, Hugin and Munin, and Fenrir in Ancient Beckoning, and out of those, she's probably best against Jormungandr, but she still doesn't show up in any of the top teams for him. In PvP, her incredible range and variety of tools, like her AoE, quick cooldown single target, and healing, make her an interesting option for the right box. Just be careful not to get her caught in the fog. For availability, she's not on the predicted banner schedule again either, so May would be the earliest that we would see her coming back. Finally, we have Dieharte. Dieharte. What are we going to do with you? The protagonist of Langrisser 3 has been stuck in a liminal space between cavalry and assassin for a long time. He has a unique helm in the Secret Realm shop, which lets him stun an enemy within 3 spaces after getting a kill. He also has a 3-cost skill that basically acts as a jacked up version of his Calamity skill, allowing him to steal buffs, ignore guard, and heal up. Finally, he's the most recent character to get an SP class upgrade on Chinese servers. Unfortunately, the consensus so far seems to be that, while it's not atrocious, it's also not quite enough to shore him up into a competitive unit like what we saw with Elwyn and Cherie, for example. Die-hard Dieharte fans will be happy to have the ability to unlock him to his maximum potential at least, and the art is really good. He's a member of Origins of Light, buffed by Dieharte, Jugler, and Freya, and Meteor Strike, buffed by Zerida and Epsilon, and Protagonists, of course, buffed by Matthew and Lavina the Great. The faction buff he brings for Origins of Light grants an additional 15% damage dealt when you have 5 or more buffs. For bonds, now here we are, this is Dieharte's main reason for existing. He unlocks the attack bonds for Dios, Freya, Gerald and Layla, Kirikaze, Lifney, Luna, Silverwolf, Sophia, and Tiaras. For his own bonds, he needs Kirikaze for his defensive bond and Tiaras for his attack bond. For content, in PvE, he's on faction for Phoenix, Scylla, and Valkyrie in the Eternal Temple, and Jormungandr and Hugin and Munin in Ancient Beckoning. If you really need to use him, he's better suited to content like Timeless Trials and Challenges, where he can use his sneaky ninja skills against normal enemies rather than gigantic bosses. On the PvP side, importantly, he has a pre-attack move again skill in Strike, a post-attack move again, a guard ignore in Calamity, and Detect, which gives him a chance to disable enemy passives. But even with all that, it would be a stretch to call him meta in any sense. A big part of Dieharte's problem is that the various pieces of his kit just don't work together in a coherent way. It doesn't help that his talent is literally just smoke. If you've already got him built, then his SP class might buy him a ticket into a specific role in your box, but I don't think it's going to make him worth building from scratch. For availability, just like the others, Dieharte also isn't appearing on the predicted banner schedule anytime soon, so we shouldn't expect to see him headline a banner before May at the earliest. So we'll do the summary stuff first, and then we'll move on to the gear banner, so here's the quick and dirty. We have the King of Crimsonia, who is suited for AoE rush boxes in PvP. He has boosted AoEs, a multi-use revive, and he becomes untargetable. We have young Jessica, who's a long-range magical turret. She's useful in a lot of PvE content, like Scylla for example, and she unlocks the attack bonds for Emilia, Nomi, and Light of Genesis. And we have Dieharte, who unlocks attack bonds for Dios, Freya, Gerald and Layla, Kirikaze, Lifney, Luna, Silverwolf, Sophia, and Tiaras. He carries a faction buff for Origins of Light, and he has an upcoming SP class. So that brings us to the notes for Noobs summaries. The King of the Red Moon might already be past his prime at this point, with boxes looking to shift more to Meteor, single-target, assassin-focused boxes later in Season 9 and 10. But if you're living in the moment, PvP would be the main reason to summon for him now. Young Jessica isn't a necessity for any content right now, but she is a decent all-round mage. She may not be as blatantly OP as her Tensei counterpart, but she'll definitely be able to help a newer account cheese its way through much of the game's PvE content. Dieharte, he has abs, but more importantly, he has bonds. He unlocks so many bonds. Mostly for kind of side-tier characters, but they're certainly important for Tiaras, and for Kirikaze if you want to use him in Ancient Beckoning. Anyway, bonds are the main reason to summon this guy. Okay, finally, let's just take a moment to talk about this new gear banner, Divine Dawn Oracle, that's launching this week. First though, as with every time I talk about equipment banners, a warning that gear banners are almost always bad value for summoning. There's a 5% SSR rate, no pity, and you can sink a lot of valuable resources into what essentially ends up being ore. So with a really rough summoning month in January with Uitham and Werner coming out at the same time, blowing summons on a piece of gear that might be a side grade for one existing character is an investment that should only be seriously considered by whales. But all that said, here's what this new gear does. The weapon is Routing Light, a lance that increases damage dealt by 2% for each tile moved before combat, up to a maximum of 10%. If you move 3 or more spaces, it inflicts a Cannot Guard debuff after battle. So as long as the tank isn't immune to this, you essentially will use this DPS unit to spike the tank, make it so they can't guard, and then your follow-up can pick off their squishier allies. The armor is Shimmering Battlesuit. It's light armor in the Last Rites class, and instead of a base stat buff, it makes you take 20% less damage from AoE. When you're forced into battle, it has a 50% chance to reduce the attacker's attack and int by 20%. The headgear is Electric Headwear, a mage hat. It's one of the many not Tenyo hats that gives plus 10% hit points. If you end your turn next to an ally, both you and the ally get immunity to displacement and deal 10% additional counter damage. So it could be helpful if you're not getting to deploy Hilda and you need to not get pushed or pulled around. It'll also go into the pile of hats that is useful if you don't have enough Tenyos. The accessory is the Heart of Redemption. It has int and magic defense as base stats, increases healing effects by 15%, and it makes you immune to fixed damage. So it's kind of like a budget swordsmith medal specifically for healers. But it doesn't have the silence immunity of the bracer, and it doesn't have the base hit points of some other heal boosting items, so maybe at least it'll be more common than bracer or swordsmith when it's added to the loot pool. Anyway, that's the new stuff. None of it is anything I particularly feel like I need to summon for, so I'll just wait for it to pop up from usual equipment farming. Alright, so that leads us to my usual reminder about upcoming banners. Okay, so the appearance of these banners this week was a bit of a surprise. We were expecting the Landius, Yulia, Jugler, and Lanford, Shelfaniel, and Virash Destiny banners, so maybe they'll be the ones to show up next week instead. Or at least one of them, and the other maybe being bumped ahead to fill where this King of the Red Moon banner was supposed to be in the original schedule. I don't know, there's still a little bit of confusion about what's going to happen with the schedule thanks to this kind of rejigging, but we'll see. This EOL cycle is supposed to be extended till December 22nd, so the next major update should debut with the Build-A-Banner workshop that lets you choose 2 characters, up to and including the launch of Patsir and Toa, for a custom-made raid-up banner. And other than that, in typical holiday fashion, we're just going to have to see what happens and roll with the punches a little bit. So that's it for this episode. I hope you found this video and these summaries helpful enough to warrant a little thumbs up, and maybe even a gentle smack of the join button. The holidays are here, and all I want from Santa is more of you in my inner circle. Aww. As always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next Should You Summon. Extra special thanks, of course, to our Langrisser tier channel members for generously supporting the channel directly. Levitt, Derek Gunderson, William Householder, Kate Soon, Jared Portela, Eden Seal, Titan Bradicus, and Shara Ilaimirius.